Alright, so there's a couple different stories I want to touch on for this video. First one of those being Tyron Woodley versus Robbie Lawler being verbally agreed on for June 29th in Minneapolis. And then we've got Henry Cejudo versus Marlon Moraes set for UFC 238 for the Bantamweight Championship in Chicago. Now, there's some obvious reasons why I want to touch on that, but let's start off with this Woodley-Lawler rematch for June 29th. We all knew they were going to make it hard for Tyron Woodley to get back to a title shot, but I truly didn't think they were going to make it this hard for him to do it. I mean, even though Tyron Woodley knocked out Robbie Lawler in the very first round the last time they fought, both of these guys are at completely different points in their career right now. I mean, you look at the fight with Lawler and Askren, and Robbie Lawler was dominating that fight. He was more powerful. He seemed like he had more burst speed than Ben Askren. Obviously, his striking was better. He just seemed like the Robbie Lawler with the fire and motivation under him, like when he fought Rory McDonald, for example. Tyron Woodley, on the other hand, his last fight against Kamaru Usman wasn't Tyron Woodley. He didn't use any of his tools. It just seemed like he was left at the starting line. He never found his range in that fight. He was getting dominated standing and on the ground against Kamaru Usman. And if you go in there and fight like that against Robbie Lawler, you're getting your head took off. Robbie Lawler is ruthless. That's how he got the nickname. And I'm not just being facetious when I say that. Robbie Lawler is ruthless when it comes to fighting. He doesn't care how bad he hurts you. He wants to go in there, win the fight, and that's it. He wants to collect his money and go home. That's generally what he does. Now, to be fair, after Tyron Woodley beat Robbie Lawler the first time, their records were pretty different afterwards. Woodley went on to defend the belt against some absolute monsters. I mean, he beat Wonderboy twice, beat Damian Maia, beat Darren Till, and then of course that fight against Usman, he got destroyed for 5 minutes straight. Whereas on the other hand, Robbie Lawler, after the fight against Tyron Woodley, he went on to beat Carlos Condit, lost to RDA, beat Cowboy Cerrone, then lost the fight to Ben Askren, of course, which is pretty controversial. There's still some drama going on with that fight, but obviously, they're not making the rematch now that we've got Woodley-Lawler rather than Askren-Lawler too. So it makes the welterweight title picture a little bit more clear with us knowing that Robbie Lawler and Tyron Woodley are fighting. Again, we obviously know the rematch with Lawler and Askren isn't happening, which probably means that Askren and Jorge Masvidal are going to fight. Then the winner of those two fights will go on to fight the winner of Usman v. Covington. So, honestly, the welterweight division is just as fun to watch right now as the lightweight division. I mean, the lightweight division was where all the superstars were. It's where the toughest matchups in the UFC were. But you look at it now, you've got Conor, who quote-unquote retired. You've got Khabib, who's still not due back for another 6 months or so. He's obviously not going to pay that fine and do the PSA for USADA, so he's got another 6 months or so. And then you've got Tony Ferguson, who's dealing with the law and all kinds of stuff outside of the ring. So honestly, I think the welterweight and probably light heavyweight divisions right now are the biggest pull for the UFC. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play this one out and how things end up, no matter who wins this fight with Tyron Woodley and Robbie Lawler. It's going to be interesting to see how these matchups play out, and it's definitely going to create some superstars and bury some people in the sand. I feel like if Tyron Woodley doesn't go out there and win this fight against Robbie Lawler, I don't see him being within a shot of the title within 4 or 5 fights. It's going to take him a winning streak of 4 or 5 fights if he loses this fight against Robbie Lawler. The UFC, he's just not something that the UFC focuses on. The UFC thinks they can't market Tyron Woodley, whereas really the man's a beast. He deserves to be marketed. It's just he goes out there and has those fights like he did against Damian Maia and Kamaru Usman that always leaves doubt in the back of people's heads. And I think that's what's happening now. Dana White has some doubts about how Tyron Woodley will perform, if he'll uphold his media obligations. And that's why we're seeing things play out like they are. Obviously, Ben Askren is very close to a title shot. So there's some big things happening in this division right now, and definitely stay tuned. Make sure to follow the channel, stay updated with everything that's going on. I'll make sure to keep you all updated with the fights that are made, the fights that are won, the fights that are lost, so on and so forth. So definitely stay tuned. Now let's get into this Cejudo versus Moraes that's set for UFC 238 for the Bantamweight Championship in Chicago. Now, the reason I emphasize the word bantamweight there is because this fight isn't for the lightweight championship. it honestly looks like the flyweight division is going to be left in the dust with this UFC 238 card between Marlon Moraes and Henry Cejudo. That's just the only thing that makes sense to me. Why is it that they would be making the Henry Cejudo fight at Bantamweight if it's not with TJ Dillashaw? That's the rematch. That's where he can be champ. Now, given he can still be champ, and Henry Cejudo could have been the one that suggested it be a Bantamweight just so we can have both belts. But if my guess is anywhere near correct, I'm gonna have to say that Dana White probably gave him this fight at Bantamweight because they're trying to weed out the flyweight division. I mean, we all remember them cutting loose so many flyweights a couple months ago, and the division has been, for lack of a better term, the division's been stagnant since then. No big things have happened other than the Cejudo Dillashaw fight, which has now been kind of outweighed by this Dillashaw PED or diuretic, whatever he failed the test for. So it just kind of makes sense that this fight is going to be the last fight that any flyweight is going to consider fighting at 125. I hate to say it, there's just no draws left in the flyweight division. I mean, we've got Joe Benavidez, we've got Sergio Pettis, who both are fantastic fighters. They're very technical, they're very quick with their striking. I mean, the hardcore fans love watching these guys fight, but we all know the UFC is driven by the casual fan these days. It's driven by superstars. It's driven by people that the UFC can put their marketing dollars behind and that people are going to pay attention to. You've got to have that it factor. You've got to have someone in the division that's taking the reins and being the superstar in the division, getting the eyes, attracting more people to those fights. And it's just not happening at flyweight. Now, one thing that I think will come positive from all this, from potentially the flyweight division being banished, I think they're going to add in that 165 weight class that everyone's been wanting. It'll go 165, 170, 175, or I'm sorry, 175 weight class is what they'll add in, which is what everyone's been wanting. I mean, that'll give Askren the ability to separate from Woodley and Pettis, which we all know he would never fight either of those guys. And I think Ben Askren truly has a chance to fight for the title very soon, and I think the UFC wants that as well with all the fans he has behind him. So honestly, this fight between Henry Cejudo and Marlon Moraes, we might as well go ahead and say our prayers for the flyweight division and get the 6 foot wide, 7 foot hole buried for it. I hate to say it like that, guys, and I'm trying to stay in the middle of the fence as much as I can with this situation, but it just seems like the flyweight division doesn't have the steam it needs to support itself any longer. So you can't really blame the UFC and Dana for making the decision to cut the weight class completely. Now, this is going to be a wonderful fight. It's going to be a very fun, very active, very quick fight between Henry Cejudo and Marlon Moraes. So definitely watch the fight. Support these little guys. I know they may not be the heavy hitters and they may not finish with knockouts all the time, but it's truly the most technical divisions in the UFC. So if you like fighting at all, if you like the science of fighting, definitely pay attention to these lighter weight guys. I'm not trying to save the flyweight division by myself, but I am trying to get as many eyes on the bantamweight division as we can. The last thing we need is more weight classes to be cut out and more drama to be started from the UFC talking about cutting these weight classes. So I wish Henry Cejudo all the best. I think he is going to come out on top in this fight. Marlon Moraes has been around forever. He's a great fighter. He's actually on a bit of a winning streak lately. So it would make sense that they're putting him up against him since that Dillashaw-Cejudo fight isn't working. I just think Cejudo's got the better hands. He's quicker. He's better on the ground. And he's going to finish the fight. So definitely stay tuned. Support these guys with what they're doing. And stay tuned to the channel as well. I appreciate you all watching the UFC and making sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. It truly helps the channel out a lot. And it means a lot to me personally as well. It helps the channel grow. So keep doing what you're doing, guys. Stay tuned for more updates. And stay tuned for the highlights coming after this weekend's event. Thanks again for watching. Y'all have a great day.